Hello, just before the podcast begins, I want to tell you about The Assassination. It's a new podcast series from the BBC World Service. My name's Owen Bennett-Jones, and I used to be the BBC's correspondent in Pakistan, and for years covered the story of one of the world's best-known politicians, Benazir Bhutto. Then she was assassinated. The Assassination is all about my 10-year investigation into what happened. There are already 7 episodes, with more to come. Search for The Assassination wherever you get your podcasts.
This is the BBC. For details of our complete range of programmes, go to bbcworldservice.com/podcasts.
Welcome to the latest global news, recorded at 14 hours GMT on Friday the 9th of February. I'm Jackie Leonard with a selection of highlights from across BBC World Service News today. Coming up, athletes from North and South Korea have marched together at the opening ceremony of the Winter Olympics in Pyeongchang. The major theme, a message of peace.
A sentiment that extended to the stands, where the president of South Korea, Moon Jae-in, shook hands with the lady sitting behind him, the younger sister of the North Korean leader, Kim Jong-un.
Also in the podcast, both the US House and the Senate have approved a new 2-year budget in late-night sittings. Russia has arrested employees at a top-secret nuclear facility who were using a supercomputer to earn cryptocurrencies.
It is a top-secret facility which made the first Soviet nuclear bomb during Stalin's rule, and it still manufactures warheads.
And later, the human eggs grown in a laboratory. But first, dozens of athletes from North and South Korea have marched together side by side through the Olympic Stadium in Pyeongchang. The crowds cheered as the athletes entered the arena under a unified flag during the opening ceremony of the Winter Olympic Games. Among the spectators were the most senior North Korean officials to visit the South since the end of the Korean War more than 60 years ago. There are restrictions on what Olympic material we can use in our podcast, but here's Alex Capstick in Pyeongchang to give you a flavour.
A colourful, at times tranquil, at times noisy experience inside the Olympic Stadium. The show featured 5 young children on an adventure, passing through an imaginary world populated by animals and creatures, mythical and real. The major theme, a message of peace, a sentiment that extended to the stands, where the president of South Korea, Moon Jae-in, shook hands with the lady sitting behind him, the younger sister of the North Korean leader, Kim Jong-un. Down below, Korean athletes, North and South, walked side by side under the unification flag. The national anthem replaced with a traditional song popular on both sides of the peninsula. And then the speeches, with President Moon declaring open these Winter Olympics.
That was Alex Capstick in Pyeongchang. Well, what is the North Korean ruler Kim Jong-un trying to achieve by sending a delegation from Pyongyang and his sister to the Games? Dan Damon spoke to Professor Chung Hee-moon, Global Chair at the University of Bath and Special Advisor for Foreign Affairs and National Security for the South Korean President, Moon Jae-in.
He has been trying to use it for political purpose. It will show that the North Korea has become some kind of normal state to the world and North Korean citizens.
And normal in a number of ways, at least according to his definition, not just out there on the world stage with athletes, but also as a military power. But that's the problem, isn't it?
Yeah, North Korea has been pursuing what is called the Pyeongjin line, that is a simultaneous pursuit of economic development and nuclear weapons. And North Korean goal is to become a normal while having nuclear weapons, which we cannot accept. That is why we should work harder to denuclearize North Korea.
How?
Yeah, there's many ways. Now several options have been discussed. One is obviously continuing sanction and maximum pressure. And Washington believes that it will work out, but that there might be some reservations. If it doesn't work, then there are 2 options. One is taking military actions, which South Korea cannot accept, China cannot accept. Another option would be just going back to dialogue and negotiation. And I don't know how they can make a new momentum going back to dialogue and negotiation. I personally prefer dialogue and negotiation.
And what are the opportunities now, bearing in mind that Pyeongchang is being seen as a Winter Olympics providing hope to the peninsula? What can be done so that we don't go back to the situation, just a few months ago?
President Moon Jae-in has been working very hard to turn peaceful Pyeongchang Winter Olympic into a lasting Olympic peace on the Korean Peninsula. That is why he wanted to really promote exchange and cooperation with North Korea, establish channels of communication with North Korea, and provide a new momentum for dialogue between Washington and Pyongyang.
What practical level then might be achievable? Do you think the reopening of the joint industrial complex, the Kaesong, is that something that would help to start doing business with the North Koreans again?
North Korea might want the reopening of Kaesong Industrial Complex and reopening of Mount Kumgang Tourist Project. But under the current international sanction regimes, it would be extremely difficult to resume both projects by South Korea.
And that's the bind, isn't it, Professor Moon, that while I know that there are many inside Moon Jae-in's government that really hope they can start to build contacts, that involves money and business, and the sanctions say, no, you can't do that.
No, but even under the current international sanction regime, there could be new venues for mutual cooperation between North and South. Like resumption of humanitarian assistance to North Korea. And also we can join the planting trees in North Korea, reforesting, We have been trying to transform the DMZ into some kinds of world peace eco park. There are several areas in which North Korea which would not violate international sanction regimes.
One of the scenarios that the hawks, if you like, not in Moon Jae-in's government, but in the previous government, believe is that all that Kim Jong-un is doing is developing his aggressive capabilities, his offensive capabilities, so that he can eventually invade the South. Do you believe that?
No, I don't buy that argument. There has been some concern that once North Korea gets stronger, then North Korea may not give up its old ambition, liberating South Korea, what they called from American imperialist occupation. But that won't happen. Unless North Korea has a lot of so-called internal supporters in South Korea, that kind of strategy won't work.
We know, Professor, that young Koreans are not interested in unification. They think it would be too expensive. They think that the North Koreans are so different from them now that they would not get on. What's your view?
No, I don't think so. It all depends upon how you define unification. If it is unification in German type, meaning absorbing North Korea by South Korea, it will involve a lot of cost. And the young generation in South Korea do not want high cost unification and risk unification. Therefore, if we can avoid unification by absorption or unification by force, such as unification in Vietnam, then the young generation will support it. Therefore, here, what I have in mind is the union of North-South Korean states like the European Union. It won't cost a lot of money. Two sovereign states. If that being the case, then young generation in South Korea will support that kind of unification. That unification will be more de facto unification rather than de jure or legal unification.
Professor Chung Hee-moon, Special Advisor for Foreign Affairs and National Security for the South Korean President Moon Jae-in. To the US now, where after late-night sittings, Congress approved a new 2-year budget. It now goes to President Trump to be signed. The bipartisan deal includes spending increases worth hundreds of billions of dollars, opposed by many conservatives. Our Washington correspondent Gary O'Donoghue, who's currently in London, told us more.
Well, after a sort of very late-night drama, really, in Congress, with the Senate not voting until after midnight, effectively the government shutting down, passing the bill, and then the House of Representatives doing it in the last hour or so. Effectively, what they've agreed is an extension of government spending until the middle of March, 23rd of March. But crucially, they've agreed a much longer-term framework in terms of defence spending and domestic spending. The Republicans wanted big increases in defence spending. The Democrats wanted big increases in domestic spending on programmes such as children's healthcare. Both have agreed that, and it's a sort of budget-busting deal in that sense that all the normal caps that were put in place, they've agreed to waive those as well.
So who's happy? Who isn't happy?
Well, you pays your money, you takes your choice. Some of the fiscal hawks are not very happy on the Republican side, but of course they've got midterm elections like everyone coming up at the end of this year. They will be able to vaunt this extra defence spending, $160 billion over the next couple of years. The Democrats are concerned that doing this budget deal still hasn't addressed the question of immigration. They're expecting a bill to be debated on the Senate floor for that next week. They wanted that tied into this budget process. It wasn't in the end, and they're effectively relying on the promises of Republicans to bring something to the floor on the so-called dreamers, the young undocumented, in the next couple of weeks.
And just to be clear, is there any chance that we're going to be doing this all over again in a few weeks' time?
Well, I think the heavy lifting has been done. I think this extra sort of timetable for the middle of March will depend on the progress on immigration. But I think the deal on the wider spending is something quite significant, and it has decoupled the toxic issue of immigration from the budget process in a sense where it should never have been.
That was Gary O'Donoghue, our Washington correspondent, currently in London. Now to a story of intrigue. The Russian Secret Service, or FSB, has detained 2 engineers of a closed nuclear facility in the western Russian town of Sarov. It's over the reported use of a supercomputer for mining a cryptocurrency. Vitaly Shevchenko from BBC Monitoring is following the story.
The detainees worked for the Federal Nuclear Center in the town of Sarov, which is more than 300 kilometers east of Moscow. It is a top-secret facility which made the first Soviet nuclear bomb during Stalin's rule, and it still manufactures warheads. The factory's press service confirms that there's been an unsanctioned attempt to use the factory's supercomputer for mining cryptocurrencies. It calls the detainees hapless miners. It's not quite clear how many have been taken into custody, but one report says 2 people have been arrested by Russia's Federal Security Service.
And just to be clear, I mean, you said it was a secret facility. What more do we know about it?
Well, it's hard to overestimate the importance of this town for Russia's nuclear industry. It's where the Soviet nuclear bomb was born. The town is so secret that it wasn't even marked on Soviet maps, and Russian citizens still require special permits to visit it. It's surrounded by a tightly guarded no man's land with barbed wire fences, and the factory itself is huge. It employs up to 20,000 people. Now, mining cryptocurrencies obviously requires great computational power and huge amounts of energy, and there have been reports of other industrial facilities in Russia being illegally used for crypto mining, and one businessman reportedly bought 2 power stations for the activity.
That was Vitaly Shevchenko from BBC Monitoring. You're listening to Global News, the most important stories and the best interviews and on-the-spot reporting from the BBC World Service. And if you missed any of the week's main events and wish to catch up, why not listen to The World This Week? Johnny Diamond can tell us what's in the latest edition.
After 4 months of wrangling, Germany has a coalition government. Sort of. The big centre-right and centre-left parties have done a deal. It will go to the membership of the junior partner, the Social Democrats, for approval. As always, there have been some big compromises made to bring the parties together. The leadership of both parties has been criticised by their activists. We'll talk to our Berlin correspondent about the deal, who has come out on top, and what it means for grand European reform plans. In South Korea, the Winter Olympics have opened with fun, flags and flair, and the presence of North Korea, a country with which the South is technically still at war. A real olive branch or just public relations? We'll look at the art of the farewell tour and what it really means, and as a private company sends a cherry red sports car roaring into space, we'll ask whether private corporations are now making the giant leaps that used to be reserved to the space agencies of the big powers.
Thanks, Johnny. That was Johnny Diamond, and it's all in The World This Week, broadcast on Saturdays and Sundays and available to download from our website. The main opposition party in Bangladesh has named the exiled eldest son of Khaleda Zia as its acting party chief. On Thursday, she was handed down a 5-year jail sentence on a corruption case. Akbar Hussain reports from Dhaka.
Tariq Rahman will temporarily take over from his mother as the head of the Bangladeshi Nationalist Party despite his conviction for corruption and money laundering. Unlike Khaleda Zia, he is living in exile in London but continues to maintain a strong influence over the party leadership. Khaleda Zia is reported to have spent the night in a disused prison in the old part of the capital. Bangladesh Nationalist Party officials said she was being kept in isolation. The BNP contests the pair's conviction and has called for nationwide protests after Friday prayers.
Akbar Hussain in Bangladesh. The main front page headline of the Times newspaper here in Britain today says top Oxfam staff paid Haiti survivors for sex. The article, written by the Times chief reporter Sean O'Neill, details a series of incidents in 2011 when aid workers for the UK charity Oxfam were found to have used local prostitutes in Haiti regularly while assisting in relief efforts there after the 2010 earthquake. After the internal investigation, Oxfam reportedly dismissed the workers, including its country director for Haiti, but it never made its findings public. Dan Damon spoke to Sean O'Neill.
The allegations are that in the aftermath of the earthquake in Haiti in 2010 and stretching into 2011, a number of senior level aid workers working for Oxfam GB in Haiti were routinely using prostitutes. And there are concerns, and some of the sources and witnesses we've spoken to are quite concerned that some of those prostitutes were very young, possibly underage girls.
And while using prostitutes isn't necessarily illegal, it's certainly not good for the reputation.
Well, it's illegal in Haiti, certainly against the code of conduct of Oxfam and the code set down by the UN for humanitarian work.
And at whom are these allegations aimed? Who were those responsible? Because the whistleblowers are very clear that there were what they called orgies going on.
There are, if you like, two strands. There are allegations against the country director, which Oxfam's internal investigation report said the country director there admitted during an internal investigation during his interview. And then there's a separate group of allegations against 6 men who were all residents at one Oxfam guest house or apartment block. And it was there that, according to our sources, these orgies, these sex parties took place.
And has Roland van Houwemaren, the country director for Oxfam in Haiti, has he commented?
No. We've been unable to reach him, but we have documentary evidence of his admissions.
And then we come to the cover-up, because this is a series of incidents from 2011. How has this emerged, and what did Oxfam say about it at the time?
At the time, Oxfam did a number of press releases. My understanding is they were approached by a whistleblower in about July 2011, someone who was working in Haiti and was very concerned about what was going on. That person took their concerns directly to head office in Oxford, and an investigation team was sent to Haiti. As I said, the country director was interviewed and made admissions and agreed to cooperate with the ongoing investigation into the other strand at the apartment block. And that resulted in 6 men being dismissed or allowed to resign under investigation. And at the time, Oxfam issued a press release, I think in around about early September 2011, saying that 6 men had resigned or left Oxfam's employee because of serious breaches of the code of conduct. Did not specify what offences took place beyond saying that this did not involve fraud. And nor, we believe, and the Charity Commission have confirmed, did they tell the Charity Commission about the detail of the allegations.
Now, that's important, isn't it? Because the Charity Commission is the body which regulates charities in the UK, like Oxfam. Presumably, they should have been told in greater detail what was going on.
They were told some information, but my conversations with them in the last few days, I think they're quite angry that they were not given the full detail.
Is there any good news here that at least Oxfam acted? Okay, they didn't declare openly what had happened, but they did remove these men.
They did, but we're not clear what happened to these men afterwards. But did they go and work elsewhere in the humanitarian sector? What information was shared with other agencies? I'm not clear on that.
That was Sean O'Neill. Well, Dan Damon also spoke to the Deputy Chief Executive of Oxfam GB, Penny Lawrence, and he asked her for the charity's response to the articles.
Well, the behaviour of some members of Oxfam staff that we uncovered in Haiti in 2011 was totally unacceptable and completely contrary to the values and the very high standards we expect of staff who are working in very complex situations with highly vulnerable people. So We were deeply upset and remain deeply upset that this could possibly happen.
But you didn't declare it to the Charity Commission?
Yes, we did.
Not in full?
As soon as we became aware of the allegations, we immediately launched an internal investigation and we informed the Charity Commission. And we informed the Charity Commission that there was also sexual misconduct when we had completed the investigation.
But Roland van Houwerwijven was allowed to resign. He wasn't given he wasn't handed over to justice.
Well, as the Times journalist has said, there were two separate allegations, and the country director was indeed allowed to resign. I think if we were conducting that investigation now, I'm not sure that would be how we would handle it. I'm pretty sure that we'd handle it differently. But the country director was allowed to resign. He was totally mortified by what was happening on his watch, but obviously it was completely unacceptable that this had indeed happened on his watch.
But according to the investigation, he admitted using prostitutes.
No, that isn't correct.
So you're disputing that part of the Times investigation? He
told us that he was not sleeping with prostitutes, and we did not, where we are potentially at fault is that we then did not investigate that. But it was not proven that Roland used prostitutes.
What does this do to the reputation of a charity founded by Quakers?
A charity that was founded in 1942 on deeply held values. It goes right to our core and it twists a knife in it. That anybody could think that kind of behaviour is acceptable is deeply, deeply distressing and upsetting to all of us here, to the public that support us, and to everybody involved in Oxfam.
That was Penny Lawrence from Oxfam. For the first time, scientists here in Britain have grown human eggs in a laboratory. The researchers at the University of Edinburgh removed egg cells from ovary tissue at their earliest stage of development and grew them to the point at which they were ready for fertilisation. The tissue was taken from volunteers who were giving birth by caesarean section. Professor Evelyn Telfer is from the School of Biological Sciences at Edinburgh University, and Dan Damon asked her who this breakthrough could end up helping.
If it could reach clinical practice, then it would be most applicable to young women who are looking at fertility preservation if before they underwent damaging treatments such as chemotherapy or radiotherapy.
So you're intervening in the process of the egg developing. That's what you've been able to do, to identify a part of that process.
Well, at the moment, clinically, young women before chemotherapy, they have a small piece of their ovary removed and stored for later use, once they're healthy. And the only option to use that is to transplant it. So that tissue is available, but that tissue contains very, very immature eggs. So what we've been able to do is to use that tissue and grow those very immature eggs all the way to the point of full maturation, so the point at which they would be ready to be fertilised. But we need to show that these eggs are indeed healthy and normal, and we haven't been able to show that at this stage.
What would you need to do to prove that?
Yeah, well, there's various things that we have to do in terms of the actual process itself, and that's what we're working on. But the next big step is to get these eggs that we grow in the culture system, to get them and attempt to fertilise them. Now, that's something that we would require authority from. We'd need to apply for a licence to the Human Fertilisation and Embryology Authority, and if we were allowed to, then we would test them. And that, of course, would be the next big step. Once we've tested their ability to be fertilised, we can then do a whole series of tests to determine whether these eggs are indeed normal.
Because what you'd be doing, in effect, if you get that permission, is to develop a viable embryo. I think under the rules, you're not allowed to let that embryo develop more than a few hours.
Yeah, that's correct about the rules. And of course, what you would do if it was allowed by the regulatory body, you would test these embryos in terms of looking at their molecular profile, because we have a lot of information about what should be happening at that very early stage of embryonic development. So within the regulations that are set down, we could get a lot of information.
A slightly silly, scary science question, Professor Telfer. Is this another step on the way to creating a human outside a human?
I don't think so, no.
Tell me why not.
Because I think that, developing a human, developing the embryo and developing the fetus and getting to the point where you have a viable offspring is an incredibly complicated process. And I know, of course, there are people working at each of these stages and in animal models. But, this has taken us almost 30 years to get to the point where we can actually get these human eggs to be grown outside the body. We could do this in mouse, almost 20 years ago. So, if that does happen, it certainly will not be in my lifetime.
Professor Evelyn Telfer from the School of Biological Sciences at Edinburgh University, and she was talking to Dan Damon. If you want to hear more from his programme, go to bbcworldservice.com and look for World Update. 3/4 of Kenya's population live in rural areas, and this week the BBC World Service has been speaking to those involved in the agriculture sector of Western Kenya. 70% of the food consumed in Kenya is produced on small farms, and it's often women who run them. These small plots of land, often less than an acre, have to grow the staple crops that will feed the family and provide money for the children's school fees. Alan Kasuja has been visiting women farmers in Kakamega County to find out how things are there at this time of year.
My name's Jacqueline Seta.
Okay, so we're walking through a plantation of bananas, and then to my left is a cow. Is that your cow?
Yeah, it's my cow, which produces 3 liters a day.
How much in terms of money?
It's 240 shillings a day.
$2 every day?
Yeah.
This is your farm. How big is it to start with?
It's a 1/4 acre.
A 1/4 acre, and I see trees, tall, thin trees, and plowed land. There's nothing growing on it.
Because now there's drought, so we cannot plant anything for now because of the drought.
And when you grow food on this land, is it for your personal consumption, for your family's consumption, or is it for you to sell?
For my families and even neighbors. If I see someone suffer with hunger, I can give a little. So we share what we have. Even if it's a little, we just share.
And that is important because there are some days which are very difficult for one family.
Yeah.
And so you go to the next neighbors to get some food.
Yeah.
And then, so how much maize goes into planting? How much do you plant and how many bags of maize do you expect to get out of it?
I have this a 1/4 and I have another one, the other side. So if I put it together, it's a 1/2 acre, which I'm expecting around 8 bags of maize.
How many children do you have?
I have 3 of them.
That must be very difficult because I still don't understand how you make your money. Where does the rest of the money come from?
So my husband is a boda man. He may end up having 300 a day.
And bodas are those taxi motorbikes.
Yeah.
And from that he might make about $3 a day.
We balance the money, and the end of the day we are just okay.
This is about what, 500 meters from your other farm?
Yeah.
Okay, and what I see in front of me is about a 1/4 acre. And from this 1/4 acre of land, which is on a bit of a slant, you say you make about 4 bags of maize.
Last season I had 3.5 because we had challenges like pests. So yesterday I sold 2 bags of them for the daughter to retain in school.
So how many bags of maize do you have left now?
1 bag.
And that's between now and September?
September.
When you get the maize out of the ground?
Yeah.
How are you going to manage? You have a big family. How are you going to manage to look after them between now and September with 1 bag of maize?
A day I can buy 1 tin of maize. For now it's 90 bob.
That's almost half of what you will make from selling your milk.
Yeah.
How many meals is that?
For 2 days.
And that is eating 1 meal a day?
Yeah, eating 1 meal a day.
So these are really difficult times, Jacqueline. These are difficult times for you.
Yeah. It's difficult. But we also pray God to provide us.
That report was by Alan Kasuja in Western Kenya. The authorities in Paris are having to close the Eiffel Tower on Friday and Saturday because of snow and black ice. The organisation that runs the tower says de-icing is a complex procedure. Danny Eberhardt reports.
It's one of the world's most visited monuments, just not at the moment. If you're trying to get to the top or the restaurant where President Macron entertained President Trump last year, you'll have to wait. Salt would corrode the latticed iron structure. Sand would damage mechanisms for the lifts. So the authorities rely on warming the viewing platforms or the time-honoured technique of shovels and some elbow grease. Ultimately, the elements and rising temperatures are likely to do most of the work. Sun and rain are forecast for over the weekend.
That was Danny Eberhardt. And that's it from us for now. But the good news is that my euphonious colleague, Emilio Sampedro, will be back with another Global News Pod later. If you would like to comment on this podcast or the topics covered in it, do please send us an email. The address, as ever, globalpodcast@bbc.co.uk. Or if you'd like to get in touch via Twitter, the hashtag Global News Pod should do it. I'm Jackie Leonard, and until next time, goodbye.